I started shouting my mouth off on air. It's not the news, it's an entertainment show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Phill Jupitus.
Thank you very much. Now, let me look at. Right, there's a tiny person there. Hello. What's your name? Reed. Cool. How old are you, Reed?
9.
Yeah, we're going to be fast-tracking your language tonight, son. So. He grew up in a pub. Dear boy, you probably know more words than me. So, hi, Reed's over here. He's 9, and his book comes out in 20 years. It's called How I Killed a Fat Man.
When Buzzcocks captain Phill Jupitus appeared in Winchester this week, he spoke exclusively to Winnell. In this brutally honest interview, he reveals the truth behind his departure from BBC Six Music.
Thank you, my friend. Very, very good of you. Because when you take a gig on, and then you kind of, when you get to like 4 years through it, you think this ain't quite right, and you can't figure out what's not right about it. I mean, it's very well paid. I love doing it, but I stopped doing it because, you know, ultimately it was just not a good fit for me.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. You said, in the book it was BBC Six Music.
Yeah.
It was, you had a big sort of fallout. It was a spectacular bust-up, I read.
Yeah.
But you did mention that if that had not happened, you'd maybe still be working there now. Do you wish that?
That was one incident that happened after I'd left them. They used to have me back to sit in for people, but then I did a show on air and I spoke out of turn on air, which is always the worst thing to do when you're a DJ. Is the although sometimes it can be the best thing that you do is actually to kind of speak quite plainly and speak the truth. But there was a lot of fuss about people altering the results of competitions and pretending people had phoned in. Well, any radio show that's pre-recorded is pretending, is lying from the get-go. And on Christmas Day, all of the radio shows you listen to, or 99% are pre-recorded, because no one goes to work on Christmas Day. So there's just one dude in the studio playing stuff out. And so, of course, they act like they're live, and that in and of itself is a conceit, is a deceit. And so when people, the right-wing media were getting very uppity about the BBC or rigging competitions, well, you just want the show to sound vibey and like people are calling in. They weren't corruptly giving away prizes to other people. They were just saying someone had won it when they hadn't, just to try and make the show feel live. And it was one of the most ludicrous overreactions to just common sense that I'd ever heard. And there was a very interesting thing. The show where I had the fallout was supposed to be the greatest collaboration records of all time. And it was a vote done with the Six Music listeners. And so it's, that was the title of it. And the record that won was an album track by Sinead O'Connor with a New Zealand pipe band, the title of which I can't remember. That was the #1 collaboration record of all time, because the Sinead O'Connor website had said, there's this thing going on, let's get this record to #1, we can do it. There's 500 of us online now, let's rig this competition. And they blew the results out of the water, because the BBC, because of all this sensationalism about tinkering with competitions, they'd left the results alone. And so I started shouting my mouth off on air about the Sinead O'Connor fan club, basically. But you know what? When you're making radio, you've got to show common sense, and that means exercising editorial control. And sometimes that does involve what at worst I would call white lies. You're just making something a piece of entertainment. It's not the news; it's an entertainment show, and so things will happen.
Ex-colleague of yours, I say colleague, possibly friend, Mark Lamar.
Yeah.
It was announced a few days ago that he was leaving radio for a similar reason.
Yeah.
I mean, you support that, I guess.
Totally.
Where is radio headed when these big presenters are leaving?
Well, I mean, Radio 2, despite the fact that subsequent to Mark's announcement said we have a commitment to more alternative music styles on Radio 2. Well, I'm afraid that the people that they're hiring to present shows does not match up with that commitment. The people that they're hiring are very mainstream. It's and you need someone. Every radio station needs presenters who management don't have to be frightened to leave alone to do their own thing, and that always, to me, reflects, I think, well on the station. If they got people that know their business, you know, one of the greatest, you know, scandals of the way the BBC acted was that they were tacitly trying to get rid of John Peel from the mid-80s through to the mid-90s just by shoving his time slot around and hoping that he'd just get pissed off and leave. They treated him incredibly shabbily, the BBC, throughout his career, and I just think that what happens is that when you're on the presenting side of things, you arrive and you're a presenter and that's it, and that's what you do all your life. When you arrive at the BBC and you work back in the scenes, you arrive as a BA, and then you get promoted to being a producer, and then you get promoted to being an editor, and then you get promoted to being a station controller, and then you can get promoted to being head of radio, and then you can get promoted to be the DG of the BBC. There's a career arc, whereas a presenter arrives and is a presenter through their entire life, and they what they do doesn't change. They just get better at it. Whereas the people that get promoted, their imagination and so forth is limited by the arc of their career. And so as people advance higher up in the BBC, they become I think they become less creative, and they become much better at handling life as you know, within a corporation. They become more corporate, and that is just the nature of the BBC. It's not their fault, and they don't do it deliberately.
So these are the people now.
Yeah, people that run the BBC. Yeah. I think the last decent DG had, I mean, who understood that people need to be left alone to do their job, is Greg Dyke. Whereas now what you've got is a Director General who spends most of his time apologising to the right-wing media that speaks for 10% of the population, if that. Daily Mail think they're the voice of the British people, the Sun and the Times think they're the voice of the British people. They're not. They're the voice of their paymasters, which is Rupert Murdoch and Lord Rothermere. You know, the BBC is the voice of the British people.
That does put a lot of pressure on the BBC and the content.
Yeah, no, it's constantly under scrutiny. I mean, with Ofcom going now, with the cuts, I mean, God, 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? Yeah. Where are we now? Do you remember? So not the Edinburgh Television Festival, just gone, the one before. James Murdoch and Cameron have already stitched up what Tory media policy is. It's already been decided.
I'll ask you one more question before you go.
Yeah.
We're here for your book.
Yes, indeed.
Anything in the future? What's coming up?
Yes, funnily enough, I'm back into musical theatre. I'm appearing in Spamalot for 5 months as King Arthur from the end of January, starting in Plymouth, and I think ending, if I'm correct, in Southampton in June. So yeah, I'm going to be on the road in a Monty Python musical, which is, as a fan, it's a real honour.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for talking
Thanks,
to us.
Steve.
I really appreciate that.
Are you crocheting or knitting?
Knitting.
Sweet. I don't know the difference.
One needle for crochet.
One needle for crochet. You can knit with one needle? Shut up. This is the best tour I have ever done. Why one needle?
If you crochet, you need one needle.
One needle,
Yeah.
that's it. And then it's just knotting around you.
It's a hook with one stitch.
Sweet. Do you do crochet?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you good at it?
No,
No? Why not?
because I don't do it enough.
You don't do it enough? You want to up your game.
I do spin.
That red scarf. What?
I spun it.
You spun. You spun your own wool.
Yes.
Leave. Get out!